karma hits someone who underestimated the quiet one in the room? Story 1. I've always been the quiet one at work. Head down, earbuds in, the person who says, "morning," and then disappears into spreadsheets. I'm not shy, just watchful. But Brad in sales decided quiet meant clueless. He started small, taking credit for my reports and meetings, interrupting me with, "Don't worry, I'll explain it," whenever I spoke. Then he moved on to my actual job. He'd stroll by my desk, grab printouts, and tell people, "My analyst pulled this together for me." Like I was furniture. I documented it. Not dramatically. No confrontations, no passive-aggressive emails. Just dates, screenshots of Teams messages, version history in the shared drive. I even recorded a meeting where he literally said, "I basically built the whole forecast myself," while my file was open on screen behind him. The week before performance reviews, Brad escalated. He tried to push a quick edit onto my quarterly numbers, something that would inflate his pipeline and make the company look like we were on track. It wasn't a rounding error. It was a lie. I said nothing. I just saved his draft, then sent my director a separate email. "Hey, I noticed some suggested changes to the forecast. Before I incorporate them, can you confirm if we're adjusting definitions?" I pulled a comparison showing the effect. Attached were the two versions and the meeting clip transcribed. Polite, neutral, quiet. Reviews day came. Brad swaggered into the big conference room like he already had the promotion. Director started with, "We need to discuss an integrity issue." Brad laughed. Actually laughed. Like this was about someone else. 15 minutes later, he was white as paper, stammering about misunderstanding. Director slid my log across the table. HR didn't raise their voice once. Just nodded and asked, "Is there any reason your name appears on edited files you claimed were yours?" He got walked out that afternoon. Here's the twist. When they audited his work after, they found he'd been inflating numbers for 2 years. My quiet little "just checking definitions" email triggered a full forensic review. Brad didn't just lose a promotion. He lost his job, his bonus, and his professional license for falsifying records. He underestimated the quiet one. Turns out the quiet one kept receipts. Story 2. My cousin Lila is the soft-spoken type who gets talked over at family dinners. She's the one who brings napkins when no one asked, and laughs quietly at jokes she could have made louder. Her husband, Mark, mistook that for weakness. Mark started cheating after their second kid, not even discreet about it. He'd work late, leave his phone face down, and spend weekends golfing. At Thanksgiving, he joked, "Lila's so chill she wouldn't even notice if I disappeared for a week." Everyone laughed. Lila smiled and passed the gravy. What none of us knew was that Lila had figured it out a year earlier. She didn't scream or throw plates. She just prepared. She got a part-time bookkeeping certificate online while the kids slept, quietly started freelancing, opened her own account, met a therapist, met a lawyer. The lawyer told her, "You need proof," so she collected it. Phone bills, hotel charges, a shared iPad he forgot about. Then the day Mark finally said the line he'd rehearsed, "I think we should separate, and I'll take the kids half the time." "You don't really have income, so," Lila said. "Okay," he looked almost relieved. Court came fast. Mark strutted in with a shiny new girlfriend and the confidence of a man who thinks charm is evidence. Leela sat quietly beside her lawyer. No makeup, hair in a bun, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. Mark smirked at me in the hallway and said, "She'll fold. She hates conflict." She didn't fold. Her lawyer laid out a spreadsheet so detailed it was basically a biography of his affair. Dates, purchases, texts, even a timeline matching golf trips to hotel stays. Then they introduced Lila's income records. She'd built a real client base, enough to be fully self-sufficient. Mark's lawyer tried to object, and the judge just said, "Counsel, your client's spending patterns are very relevant." Mark lost custody time because of instability. Lost marital assets because he'd used joint money on the affair. And Lila got the house. After the ruling, Mark leaned toward her, furious, and hissed, "How long have you been planning this?" Lila finally looked him in the eye and said softly, "Since the Thanksgiving you joked about me not noticing." He didn't realize she'd been listening the whole time. Story 3. I was the new partner of a guy named Jason. His ex, Tessa, called him too quiet to survive without me. She said it like a cute insult on social media, always tagging him in posts about people who don't talk because they don't have thoughts. Jason was quiet. He'd listen for 10 minutes before saying one sentence that somehow wrapped up the whole conversation. When Tessa and I met to coordinate their son's schedule, she treated him like a child. "Just say yes if you understand, honey." She also kept forgetting to tell him about school events so she could paint him as uninvolved. He never argued. He'd just nod, take notes on his phone, thank her, and leave. I used to want to fight for him, but he'd squeeze my hand and say, let it play out. Then the kids' school did a surprise Family Day performance. Tessa posted this big rant about how Jason didn't show up, how she was basically a single mom, how some men are so passive they vanish. The post went semi-viral among her friends. She tagged his employer. She tagged his mom. She tagged me. Jason didn't comment. He just emailed the principal the next morning. Hi, could you please send me any communications about Family Day and the RSVP log for parents? I want to understand where the breakdown happened. 2 days later, we were in mediation. Tessa came in glowing from all the sympathy likes. Her lawyer opened with, my client has concerns about the father's lack of involvement. Jason's lawyer stood up and handed over a binder. Inside, every unanswered email he'd sent for 2 years, screenshot receipts of texts where he asked about events, calendar records showing she'd changed pickup times last minute, and that principal's letter confirming the school had emailed Tessa 3 times, and never Jason because she'd listed only herself as contact. Tessa's face did this slow collapse, like she'd been holding a grin up with tape and it finally snapped. The mediator looked at her and said, it appears you've been restricting information. She tried to laugh it off. He never asked. He's so quiet. Jason spoke for the first time in the room, calm as water. I asked. You just liked the version of me that didn't fight back. Result. Communication oversight went court level, and the judge ordered a parenting app monitored by the court. Her ability to control the narrative evaporated overnight. Here's the emotional punch. On the way out, their son grabbed Jason's hand and said, I knew you were trying. Mom just says loud stuff. Quiet didn't mean absent. Quiet meant patient. Story 4. I'm a middle school teacher. There was a kid in my class named Rowan. Tiny, pale, always reading, never raising his hand. He had this exhausted, older than 12 vibe. The loud kids called him NPC. One day, a bully named Cade snatched Rowan's sketchbook and waved it around. Rowan didn't even look up. Cade kept going. He's too scared to talk. Then he ripped out a page and started doing that fake crying baby voice. I started to intervene, but Rowan stood slowly and said, very quietly, give it back. Cade laughed and shoved him. Rowan stumbled into a desk. Everyone expected tears. Rowan just walked to my desk, asked to go to the nurse, and left. Cade high-fived his friends like he'd won a prize. 2 days later, our school resource officer pulled Cade out of class. I found out after school why. Rowan's mom is a paralegal. When Rowan got home with bruises and his torn sketchbook, he didn't rant. He handed her his phone. He'd been keeping a notes app log of every incident. Dates, times, witnesses, specific quotes. He'd also quietly turned on his phone recorder in his hoodie pocket during the shove. The audio caught Cade's taunting and the impact. Mom didn't call the school to yell. She filed a formal complaint with the district, attached the evidence, and copied the officer. District policy required an investigation because it involved injury and repeated harassment documented over time. Cade's parents stormed in to demand Rowan be punished for setting him up. The principal played the recording and then asked them, is that your son's voice? Their anger drained like a tub unplugged. Cade got suspended, removed from sports for the season, and had to attend restorative sessions. The punchline isn't the suspension. It's what happened in that restorative circle. Cade came in swaggering, ready to say sorry for getting to say sorry. Rowan sat there quiet as always, hands folded. Cade smirked and said, whatever, I didn't mean it. Rowan finally spoke, soft but clear. You weren't joking. You were practicing being cruel. And you got good at it because no one stopped you. The counselor later told me Cade started crying in the hallway because no adult had ever described him that accurately. He underestimated the quiet kid as powerless. Turns out the quiet kid was observing, and his words hit like a hammer precisely because he didn't waste many. Story 5. At my best friend Nina's wedding, her older sister Camille ran the show like a hostile CEO. She corrected the florist, yelled at the DJ, insulted the bridesmaid's hair. She also kept taking digs at Nina's fiancé, Leo, who is the definition of quiet. Leo laughs politely, carries chairs, never raises his voice. Camille cornered me at the bar and said, Leo's sweet, but he's kind of blank. Nina needs someone who can keep up with our family. She'd already had a few glasses of champagne and a lifetime of thinking volume equals value. At dinner, Camille stood up for a toast that turned into a roast. She joked that Nina used to date real men, then looked at Leo and said, no offense, you're just so silent I forget you're there. People half laughed, half cringed. Leo smiled, nodded, and sat back down. Everyone thought he took the hit. Then came the speeches. Leo stood up last. He walked to the mic and said, I'm not great at talking. So I wrote something. Camille rolled her eyes dramatically. He didn't read vows. He clicked a remote. The screen behind him flickered onto a slideshow titled, How Nina Saved Me. It wasn't cheesy. It was devastatingly thoughtful. Photos no one had seen. Nina helping his little nephew in the hospital. Nina sitting with his dad in hospice. Nina quietly paying for a stranger's groceries. Each photo had a short caption in Leo's understated voice. The room went dead quiet in a good way. People started wiping eyes. Then, at the end, he said, "There's one more thing I want to thank Nina for." Another click. A screenshot appeared. A group chat called Operation Free Nina. It was Camille and two cousins from 3 months earlier, plotting to set Nina up with Camille's coworker and get her away from that mute guy. The last message read, "I'll embarrass him at the wedding. She'll see what she's settling for." Camille made a noise like a chair scraping concrete. Her face went nuclear. Leo stayed calm. Nina saw this the day it happened. She asked me not to start a war with her family, so I didn't. But I want today to be honest. The loudest person in the room isn't always the one who loves her most. Nina stood, took his hand, and said into the mic, "If you ever try to manage my life again, you won't be in it." Camille left before dessert. The rest of us stayed in stunned, teary silence that slowly turned into the loudest applause I've ever heard. Quiet doesn't mean unaware. Sometimes quiet means you're choosing your moment. And when that moment comes, it levels the whole room. Story 6. I'm writing this as the loud friend who finally learned that silence isn't emptiness. We live in a small condo building with an HOA run by a retired guy named Enzo, who treats the bylaws like scripture. Monthly meetings were basically his comedy set. He'd mock people's questions, bulldoze votes, and brag about how he kept the riffraff in line. There was one homeowner who never spoke, a woman in her late 30s named Mara. She'd sit in the back with a notebook, hair tucked behind her ear, listening while Enzo steamrolled everyone. He called her our little ghost, and once joked, "Mara's here to make sure we don't summon demons, right?" People did that polite laugh because no one wanted to be next. Mara smiled thinly and wrote something down. Then Enzo proposed a special assessment for repairs, $4,000 per unit. He swore it was urgent, no time to shop around, and he'd already picked a contractor, his buddy's company. A few of us pushed back. Enzo snapped, "If you don't like it, run for the board. Otherwise, sit down." Mara didn't react, just kept taking notes. 2 weeks later, an email hit everyone's inbox from Mara. Subject line, "Please review before paying assessment." Attached. A clean, terrifying spreadsheet. She'd pulled public records showing Enzo's buddy contractor had been dissolved for fraud in another region. She'd linked invoices from our HOA bank statements. Yes, she had requested them months ago, showing Enzo had already paid a $12K deposit without a vote. She'd also included a copy of state HOA law, highlighting the exact penalties for self-dealing and improper assessments. Enzo blew up in the group chat, calling her paranoid. Quiet people always have something to hide, etc. The next HOA meeting was packed. Mara sat in the same spot. Enzo started his usual rant. She raised her hand for the first time ever and said, gently, "I've already filed a complaint with the state DCA and requested an audit. They'll be contacting us this week." The room went so still you could hear the HVAC click. Enzo laughed, this big fake bark, and said, "You don't have the nerve." Mara slid a letter across the table. Certified stamp. State seal. He got removed from the board that night by emergency vote. Here's the punch. Mara wasn't some random cautious homeowner. She was a forensic accountant for a state agency. She'd been quiet because she was building a case and she didn't want anyone tipping him off. He underestimated the ghost. Turns out she was the audit. Story 7. Our grandfather's funeral was the first time I'd seen the whole family in years. The air felt thick with old politics. The loudest in the room was my Uncle Rafi. Booming voice, gold watch, that habit of clapping people on the back like he's christening them. He cornered everyone to remind them he was the real son, the one who handled everything. Then he spotted my sister Hannah. She was sitting by the window, black dress, hands folded, saying almost nothing. Rafi leaned over and stage whispered to me, "Your sister's sweet, but she doesn't have the spine for grown-up stuff." Good thing I'm here. Context. Grandpa had a small business. Everyone knew Rafi had helped manage it near the end, which is family code for he was skimming. At the post-funeral meal, Rafi stood up and announced that Grandpa had told him privately that the business should go to him alone. He made it sound noble, like he was sacrificing to carry the family legacy. A few cousins nodded uneasily. My mom looked like she'd swallowed a rock. Hannah didn't look up. Rafi pushed further, waving a folder. I've got paperwork. But don't worry, I'll take care of you all. I'm not heartless. He actually patted Hannah's shoulder like she was a pet. Finally, Hannah stood. She walked to the front without drama and said, I don't think Grandpa meant that. Her voice was quiet enough that people leaned in. Rafi smirked. Oh? And what makes you think that? Hannah pulled out her phone and connected it to the restaurant speaker system. Because Grandpa recorded something for us. A voice filled the room. My grandfather's. Tired, but clear. He'd started recording little messages when his health slipped. In this one, dated 3 months earlier, he said, he loved us. He wanted the business sold and the money split equally, and he explicitly said, Rafi, stop treating my work like your lottery ticket. If you steal from your siblings after I'm gone, you'll be stealing from me. No one breathed. Rafi's face went through all 5 stages of grief in 10 seconds. He lunged for the phone. Hannah stepped back and added, There's more. I sent these recordings to the lawyer last week. The will was updated yesterday. He tried to speak, but what came out was this small, stupid squeak. The emotional punch. My mom started crying. Not loud sobs, just this relieved, broken sound. Hannah went to her and held her while Rafi sat there staring at his folder like it had betrayed him. He underestimated the quiet one at a funeral dinner. The quiet one had been sitting beside Grandpa for months, listening, and saving his last words. Story 8. This happened in my grad lab, and I'm still kind of shaking when I think about it. We had a postdoc named Vika who barely talked. She'd show up at 7 a.m., run experiments like a machine, and leave with a nod. Our lab manager, Dr. Holt, couldn't stand her. He was the swaggering type who loved debates, aka dunking on students in front of the PI. Holt called Vika technically competent, but not visionary. He'd rewrite her protocols without asking, then tell the PI that Vika was too timid to lead. During meetings, he'd say things like, Vika, you're quiet. Do you even disagree? And then answer his own question with a laugh. The PI trusted Holt, so Vika just absorbed it. No fights, no tears, just the same blank calm. Then a big conference rolled around. Holt insisted on presenting the lab's flagship results. Results Vika had produced. Data she'd collected over a year. She was listed as middle author. Holt joked in front of everyone. Don't worry, Vika doesn't like the spotlight. Day of the talk, Holt strode on stage, clicked to his first slide, and froze. Because the slide wasn't his. It was a title card that read, Data Integrity Update. Please read before viewing results. He tried to click forward. It advanced to a screen showing raw data files, timestamps, and a highlighted cluster labeled Unapproved Modifications. The room started murmuring. The PI was in the front row, sitting up like someone had dumped ice water on him. Vika stood from the back of the hall and walked to the aisle mic. Still quiet, still composed. Hi, sorry to interrupt. I need to clarify that Dr. Holt's summarized figures differ from the raw outputs. I recreated the analysis with the original files and sent a full report to the conference ethics committee this morning. Holt spun around, mouth open, making that, what are you doing face. She didn't look at him. She looked at the PI. Then she dropped the final line. The modifications increased effect size by about 30%. I'm not comfortable presenting altered science. Security and the session chair escorted Holt off stage for discussion. The PI stood there in public, red as a beet, staring at Vika like he'd never met her. Twist. Vika didn't do it to embarrass Holt. Afterward, she told me, almost apologetic. I gave him 6 chances to correct it privately. He ignored my emails. I didn't want the lab to get investigated later. Holt was fired within a month. The PI wrote Vika a recommendation so glowing it felt like an apology in paper form. Everyone thought the quiet one was passive. She was just waiting until the truth had a microphone. Story 9. When I moved in, there was a guy on our street named Darren who fancied himself king of the block. Always loud, always helping. If your trash can fell, he'd pick it up and then tell 5 people about it. He also had a side hustle fixing cars in his driveway. Across from him lived Mrs. Lynn. Older, careful, tiny voice. She'd wave politely and go back to her garden. Darren loved targeting her. He'd knock on her door saying her driveway weeds were a code violation and offer to remove them for cash. He'd tell her car sounded dangerous and offer a discount repair. She always nodded, said thank you, and paid. He bragged about it one barbecue. She's sweet but doesn't know anything. You just gotta be firm. One evening, Darren strutted around saying Mrs. Lynn had agreed to sell him a strip of her side yard for parking because she doesn't use it anyway. He even painted little stakes on the grass. Some people shrugged. Mrs. Lynn didn't come outside. The next weekend, a city survey crew showed up. Then 2 police cars. Then a woman in a blazer carrying a portfolio. Mrs. Lynn came out, still quiet, and handed the blazer lady a folder. Darren was already puffing up, laughing at the overreaction. The blazer lady introduced herself as Mrs. Lynn's daughter, an attorney specializing in land use fraud. She said politely that her mother had never consented to any sale, and that Darren's stakes were illegal encroachment. Darren scoffed. Your mom said yes. She's just confused. Mrs. Lynn looked him dead in the face and said softly, I said thank you. I never said yes. Then her daughter opened the folder and started reading. Copies of every Venmo payment Darren had taken from multiple neighbors for repairs, a stack of receipts proving he'd charged for parts never installed, and a list of city permits he'd never pulled. Mrs. Lynn had quietly asked neighbors for their invoices to help her budget, then handed everything to her daughter. The survey crew confirmed the property line. The police asked Darren to step aside. Emotional punch. I watched Mrs. Lynn hold her daughter's hand like she might float away. She wasn't angry. She looked tired, like someone finishing a long chore. Darren got cited for fraud, unlicensed mechanical work, and trespass. He tried to yell at Mrs. Lynn as they loaded his tools into evidence bags. She just went back to her garden. Everyone underestimated the quiet grandmother. Turns out she'd been collecting the whole neighborhood's story, waiting for the right person to read it out loud. Story 10. My buddy Caleb is one of those people who thinks confidence is a personality. We were on a guy's trip and ended up at a poker night hosted by a friend of a friend. Caleb talked trash the second he sat down. Hope you all brought rent money. Oh wow, actual chips, fancy. There was a guy at the table named Soren. Hoodie, calm eyes, said maybe 6 words all night. Caleb kept needling him. You okay over there, quiet man? Blink twice if you need help. Soren just smiled a little and played. Caleb ran hot early and got louder. He started narrating everyone's tells like he was on TV. When Soren folded, Caleb announced, See? I scared him off. By midnight, it was down to Caleb and Soren. Pot was big enough that people were standing behind them. Caleb was buzzing, cocky, already imagining the story he'd tell. He shoved all in on a reckless bluff and leaned back like a movie villain. Soren didn't flinch. He stared at the cards for a long time, then asked Caleb quietly, You sure? Caleb laughed. Oh, I'm sure. You gonna call or you gonna nap? Soren called. Caleb flipped his hand, smug, expecting Soren to fold in shame. But Soren turned over a straight, clean, undeniable. Room erupted. Caleb's grin melted into this stunned, wounded look like a kid whose magic trick failed. Caleb tried to save face, blurted, What, you're some kind of poker robot? Soren shrugged. Not really, and started gathering chips to leave. Then the host said, Wait, you're that Soren? Apparently Soren was a low-profile pro who'd won a televised tournament years ago and then disappeared from the scene. I didn't recognize him. Caleb definitely didn't. Everyone surrounded Soren with questions. He answered politely, still quiet. Here's the twist that punched me. As Soren walked out, he stopped beside Caleb and said softly, You're not bad. You just talk when you should watch. Caleb didn't snap back. He just nodded, eyes shiny. The whole ride home he was silent, like someone had handed him a mirror he didn't know he needed. We all underestimated the quiet guy as a pushover. But the real karma wasn't losing money. It was watching Caleb realize, in one quiet sentence, how much noise he used to cover up not knowing what he was doing. Story 11. I work at a hotel bar attached to a convention center. You see every kind of confidence here. Real, fake, and I read one LinkedIn post and now I'm a wolf. The worst of those was a guy named Trent. Mid-40s, Bluetooth earpiece even at happy hour, always holding court about crypto, momentum, and how people who don't talk are waiting to be led. He started bringing a little circle of younger conference folks to my bar late nights. He'd buy a round, tell war stories, then slide into mentorship. The pitch was always the same. He had an insider pre-IPO deal, just needed fast movers. I couldn't prove it was a scam, but I'd seen enough desperation to recognize the scent. At the end of the bar sat Nadia. She'd come in most nights after her shift upstairs. Tiny, soft-spoken, always reading on her iPad. Trent hated her because she didn't orbit him. He'd toss comments her way like pebbles. Hey, quiet girl, you want to hear about real money? You should smile more, you look like a tax auditor. People laughed. Nadia just sipped soda water and kept reading. One night, Trent got meaner. He pointed to her and told his group, That's what fear looks like. Silent people are silent because they're broke. Nadia finally looked up. Trent, she said, calm as a thermostat. Are you still using the name Summit Ledger for your fund? The bar went weird quiet. Trent blinked. Yeah? Why? She turned her iPad so his little circle could see. Because this here is the cease and desist you ignored, plus the FTC complaint number you earned last month. Summit Ledger isn't a fund. It's a shell you set up after your first one got flagged. Trent laughed too hard. What are you, FBI? She shrugged. No. I'm compliance at the fintech you keep claiming to have inside access to. She tapped again. New screen. A company-wide warning memo with his photo. We've been tracking you. I was waiting to confirm you were here. You could feel the room tilt. Like everyone suddenly realized they'd been standing on the edge of something. One of the younger guys quietly put his wallet away. Another said, Wait, you told me you worked there. Nadia stood, slid a business card to the group and said, If you already sent him anything, email this address now. We'll help you file chargebacks. Then she paid her tab and walked out. No speech. No flourish. Trent tried to keep smiling, but it collapsed into this sweaty panic. He left 10 minutes later, alone. The punch? 2 days after that convention, I saw Nadia again. She tipped me extra and said softly, Thanks for not letting him bully people here. Quiet doesn't mean helpless. Sometimes it means you're watching a predator long enough to put a net on him. Story 12. Our family is loud. Not fun loud. More like, whoever wins the argument gets to be right forever. My brother Arturo has always been the loudest of us. Jokes, opinions, and this habit of narrating everyone's lives like he owns the microphone. My nephew Emiliano is the opposite. Gentle kid. Speaks when spoken to. At gatherings, he sits near the doorway, eating slowly, listening more than talking. Arturo calls him the lamp, like he's just there to be plugged in. It's cruel, but people let it slide because Arturo is exhausting to fight. At my daughter's quince, Arturo had already had tequila and started doing what he loves, telling stories about himself. Then he drifted to Emiliano. Ay, mijo, still quiet? You know silence won't pay your bills, right? He pinched Emiliano's cheek in front of everyone. You should learn from your cousins. They have ambition. Emiliano smiled politely. My daughter shot me a look like, Please don't let him ruin my night. I was about to intervene when Emiliano stood and walked toward the DJ booth. Arturo laughed. Look, the lamp's turning on. Emiliano tapped the mic. Sorry, everyone. Quick thing before the dance. His voice was soft but steady. I made a video for Sophia. We expected cute childhood photos. The screen lit up with that for a second. Then it cut to a different montage. Screenshots of Arturo's text to my mom over the last year. Messages demanding money. Messages calling her useless when she said no. Venmo requests with, or I'll tell everyone what you did. The hall froze. My mom's hands went to her mouth. I felt my stomach drop through the floor. Arturo lurched up, red-faced, sputtering, What is this? Emiliano's voice didn't change. Grandma didn't want to tell anyone because she thought it would split the family. She asked me to help set up her new phone. I saw everything. He swallowed once, hard. I'm not loud, but I'm not blind. He clicked again. The last slide was a simple text card. Arturo, return the money you took from her, or I'll send this to your employer and your wife. Arturo looked around for allies and found none. My mom started crying. Not hysterical, just this small shaking grief. My daughter, in her giant dress, walked off the dance floor and went straight to her grandma. Arturo bolted out of the hall. The emotional punch. Emiliano stepped down and sat back by the doorway like he hadn't detonated a bomb. But his hands were shaking. I went over to him and he whispered, I didn't want to ruin her quince. I just didn't want Grandma to keep shrinking. Quiet kid, loud courage. And for the first time in years, my mom stopped apologizing for needing protection. Story 13. I had to spend a few weeks in oncology with my mom. If you've ever sat in those chairs, you know the vibe. Tired people, soft voices, and the sacred rule that you don't make it harder for someone else to exist. Except for a guy named Paulo. Big talker, chain necklace, constantly complaining about the slow system. He'd pace, shout at volunteers, and narrate everyone's business like he was doing commentary. There was a nurse, Elise, who never reacted to him. Tiny woman, calm eyes, spoke only when necessary. Paulo decided that meant she was easy. He'd snap his fingers at her. Hey, quiet one, bring my dad water. He'd cut in front of other families and say, She'll let me, she doesn't care. Elise would just say, Sir, please take a seat, and keep moving. One afternoon, Paulo really crossed it. He started yelling that Elise forgot his dad's scan again. The waiting room went tense. Elise didn't argue. She walked to the desk and said, Paulo, can we talk in private? Paulo puffed up like he'd won. He followed her into the consult room, still barking. We all expected a shouting match. 10 minutes later, the head oncologist came out and asked Paulo to step into administration. His voice was gentle, but the look in his eyes was not. Turns out Elise wasn't just a nurse. She was the unit's patient safety officer. Her whole job was tracking aggressive behavior that threatened care. She had documentation from 3 separate incidents, including a clip from the hallway camera of Paulo blocking a wheelchair while yelling. Administration told him he had 2 options: sign a behavior contract limiting his access to the ward, or be removed and have his father's care transferred. He screamed about rights. They stayed calm. Here's the twist. While Paulo was melting down, his dad, this frail, quiet man we'd barely seen speak, walked out of the consult room. He looked at Paulo and said, "Sit down." Paulo froze. His dad said, to the entire waiting room, voice shaking but clear, "My son thinks loud is love. It's not. It's fear. Nurse Elise has taken better care of me than he has." You could hear people inhale. Paulo's face crumpled in real time. He signed the contract without another word. Then he sat beside his dad like a kid who'd finally been told no by the only person he still wanted approval from. Elise passed by later, gave my mom her meds, and said softly, "You okay?" Like nothing had happened. The quiet one didn't just win. She made the loud one face something he'd been drowning out his whole life. Story 14. We had a Discord server for our friend group. Mostly memes, game nights, venting. There was a guy in it named Jun. He almost never spoke. When he did, it was a single line like LOL or nice. One of our louder friends, Kira, decided Jun was dead weight. She'd mock him on voice calls. "Jun's here as moral support. Say hi, Jun." He'd chuckle politely. She also started a side channel without him, The Real Hangouts, because she said he doesn't add anything. Then our group planned a big cabin trip. Kira handled the payments. People sent her money through various apps. Jun didn't say much in the planning channel, so Kira told everyone, "I'll just cover Jun. He probably won't come anyway." Trip weekend arrives. We're at the cabin. No Jun. Kira is smug, talking about how some people just don't show up to life. Saturday night, her phone buzzes. Then mine. Then everyone's. Jun posted in the main server for the first time in months. "Hey, sorry to spam. Kira, can you explain why you requested refunds from everyone's payments last week and rerouted them to your personal account?" He attached screenshots, Stripe receipt IDs, a tidy list of amounts and dates, a link to a shared Google sheet titled Cabin Trip Funds Audit. The room went silent like someone hit mute in real life. Kira laughed too fast. "What? That's not..." Jun replied again, still calm. "I work in cybersecurity fraud. The payment processor logs are time-stamped. I'm giving you 10 minutes to send the money back before I report it." Kira started shaking. She tried to DM Jun, but he'd already posted the conversation publicly. Her admitting she was borrowing the money to cover rent and would fix it later. We were all staring at our phones, then at her, like she'd turned into a stranger mid-sentence. The kicker? Jun wasn't even planning to come. He'd gone quiet because he'd been taking care of his mom and didn't have the energy. But when he saw Kira refund trick people, he said he felt wide awake for the first time in weeks. Kira paid everyone back that night. She left Sunday morning without saying bye. Emotional punch. Jun finally joined voice chat later and said quietly, "I didn't want to humiliate her, but I didn't want you all thinking silence means I'm not paying attention." The quiet one wasn't absent. He was logged on, watching the whole time. Story 15. I got my first job in a trendy open kitchen place. The head chef, Renata, was a legend. Loud, tattooed, brilliant, and mean. She ran the line like a battlefield and treated the dish pit like a basement. The dishwasher was a guy named Tobin. Early 50s, gray hair, gentle face. He'd say, "Heard," softly when someone barked at him. Renata called him Zen Master sarcastically. If a plate was late, she'd yell, "Tobin, wake up! This isn't a yoga retreat." He just nodded and kept scrubbing. One night, during a slammed Saturday, Renata lost it. She stormed into the dish pit, grabbed a rack of plates still steaming, and hurled it into the sink, splashing Tobin. "You're too slow. Do you even care?" Tobin wiped his glasses, said, "Okay," and went back to work. We all felt sick watching it. Renata strutted out like she'd conquered gravity. Monday morning, the entire staff got a calendar invite from operations. Weird, because we don't do meetings. In the back office, our GM sat pale. Next to him was Tobin, in a button-down I'd never seen him wear. He cleared his throat. "Hi, everyone. I'm sorry for the surprise." He slid a folder onto the table. "I need to report a safety issue." Inside were photos of cracked gas hoses behind the line, grease traps overflowing, and a log of every time Renata had ignored maintenance requests. Dates, signatures, everything. He'd been quietly documenting hazards for months because he was worried someone would get hurt. The GM looked at Renata and said, "Why haven't I seen any of this?" Renata tried to scoff. "He's a dishwasher. He doesn't..." Tobin cut in, still soft. I'm also a retired fire marshal. This place is one spark away from a headline. The room went nuclear quiet. Corporate shut the restaurant for 2 days. Renata got suspended pending investigation. New safety protocols got installed. Twist. On his way out, Tobin handed Renata a small envelope. She opened it in front of us, expecting a complaint. It was a photo. Renata at 19, working her first kitchen job, smiling in a dish pit. On the back he'd written, "You deserved respect then. So do I now." She sat down like her bones had suddenly gotten heavy. He never raised his voice. He just reminded everyone that the quiet one might be the only adult in the room. Story 16. I was on a packed high-speed train, the kind where everyone's half asleep and pretending not to hear each other's phone calls. Across the aisle sat this guy. Luca-type haircut, flashy jacket, filming himself for TikTok at full volume. He kept panning the camera around like we were props in his show. Most people did the tight-lipped stare out the window. One passenger didn't react at all. A petite woman in a navy coat, maybe late 50s, knitting something soft and gray. She had that unbothered, "I have lived through worse than you" aura. Influencer guy spotted her and decided she was content. He leaned over with his phone in her face and went, "Signora, say hi to my followers. What are you making? Is it for your cats?" He laughed loud enough to make the whole carriage flinch. She didn't look up. Just kept knitting. That annoyed him. He started narrating her. "She's shy, guys. This is why old people are boring." Then he reached out and tugged the yarn, like a child testing a fence. The knit slipped off her needle. I thought she'd snap. She didn't. She set her needles down, folded the piece carefully like it was precious, and said, "Quiet, polite, please don't touch other people's things." He grinned at his phone. "See? She talks. Do it again, Nona. Say something spicy." She waited. Not dramatic, just long enough to make him keep filming. Then she stood, walked to the end of the car, and tapped a panel beside the door. A uniformed conductor arrived almost instantly. The woman spoke softly to him in rapid Italian. The conductor nodded, serious. Then he called another staffer. Then another. Influencer guy kept laughing, saying, "Oh, she's tattling, guys, I'm shaking." 2 minutes later, the conductor returned with a tablet. "Sir," he said, "you've been recorded harassing a passenger and filming without consent. You'll need to disembark at the next stop." The guy started blustering about rights and public space. The conductor didn't budge. Here's the twist. The quiet woman turned her phone around. On screen was a clear clip. His face, his hands pulling her yarn, his voice mocking her. She'd started recording in her lap the second he reached for her. And because he'd been live streaming, there were dozens of witnesses in his comments too. She looked at him kindly and said, "I wasn't tattling. I was making sure your audience saw the real you." At the next station, he was escorted off, still ranting at his phone. The woman sat back down, picked up her needles, and resumed knitting like she'd merely adjusted a pillow. When the carriage finally exhaled, she glanced up at me and said softly, "Some people think quiet means alone. It doesn't." Story 17. Community theater is 90% love and 10% chaos. Our chaos had a name. Celine, lead actress, voice like a siren, ego like a stadium. She treated rehearsal like her personal worship service. She'd roll her eyes at notes, forget blocking if it didn't flatter her, and openly mocked anyone she thought was beneath her, especially our costume designer, Priya. Priya was tiny, soft-spoken, always with pins in her mouth and a measuring tape around her neck. She spoke in this calm, careful way, like every word was hand-stitched. Celine hated that. "Priya, I need drama," she'd announce, yanking at seams. "These dresses make me look like a librarian." Priya would just say, "I can adjust the waistline," and take notes. Celine started calling her Little Mouse in front of everyone. Opening night comes. Celine sweeps into the dressing room and finds her gown different. Black velvet instead of burgundy satin. No slit. High collar. She exploded. "Priya, what is this? I will not go on stage dressed like a funeral curtain." Priya walked in holding a garment bag, calm as ever. "That is your costume." Celine jabbed a finger at her. "Fix it, now." "You think because you're quiet I won't ruin you?" Priya blinked once. "I'm sorry you're upset." She opened the garment bag. Inside was Celine's old burgundy dress. "You can wear this one." Celine snatched it and stormed toward the stage. 5 minutes later, she was back, pale. She'd tried to step into the burgundy dress and realized the zipper was locked shut with a tiny metal tag. Like the tags on retail clothes. You couldn't cut it without destroying the fabric. She wheeled on Priya. "What did you do?" Priya said softly. "I followed the director's instruction. You were told not to alter your costumes without approval. You did. Twice. The replacements were for opening night. Selena sputtered. But I'm the lead. The stage manager walked in with the director on speakerphone. Celine, the director said coldly, you refused fittings, insulted crew, and cut the dress yourself last week. Tonight you wear what Priya prepared or you don't go on. Celine looked around for sympathy and found none. She went on in the black velvet, furious, and tried to act through it. But the collar forced her chin up. The sleeves pinned her arms to elegant movements, and the lighting made her look like the character she'd been ignoring all along. The audience loved it. Reviews next day praised the bold costume choice that revealed hidden vulnerability. Twist punch. After curtain call, Celine cornered Priya to hiss, "You trapped me." Priya just smiled tiredly. "No, I saved the show." Then she added, almost whispering, "Also, I'm the one who designs for the regional festival you audition for every year. I was wondering why you never got callbacks." Celine froze. Priya walked away carrying a pincushion like a crown. Story 18. I joined a mountain rescue volunteer group because I wanted to do something real. I also wanted to feel like a hero, if I'm being honest. First training weekend I was all energy, cracking jokes, talking about my gym stats, offering to lead hikes I didn't know the trails for. There was one guy I barely noticed, Oscar. Quiet, lean, older than most of us. He sat in the back of briefings, asked no questions, moved like he was conserving battery. I decided he was dead weight. During a rope practice, I made a dig. "Hey, Oscar, you awake? You're so quiet I forget you're on the team." People chuckled. He just nodded. Then came the overnight scenario. Simulated missing hiker, storm rolling in, teams split. I volunteered loudly to lead my group uphill because I knew my way around. Spoiler, I didn't. Fog hit. I took a wrong drainage line and suddenly we were cliffed out with people tired and cold. I was trying to act confident while panic gnawed my ribs. We were losing time. I radioed for help, voice shaking. A calm voice came back. "Hold position. Don't move yet. Oscar." 20 minutes later, he appeared through the mist like he'd been part of the weather. No drama. He checked everyone's harnesses, scanned the terrain, and quietly pointed at a safe traverse I hadn't even seen. "We go that way. Single file. I'll anchor." We made it off the cliff and found the missing hiker faster than any other team. Nobody cheered. Everyone was just grateful. Back at base, the coordinator gathered us. He said there'd been a real call-out nearby, an actual lost family, and one SAR member had peeled off to assist without interrupting our drill. He asked us to guess who. We looked around. Oscar wasn't there. The coordinator smiled. "Yeah, he just got back. Oscar's been doing this since before half of you were out of school. He's the person you hope shows up when you screw up." I went to apologize after debrief. He was packing quietly. No pride glow, just tired hands. I started, "Hey, I'm sorry He cut me off gently. "You wanted to lead because you care. Good. Next time, care more about listening than being seen." Then he handed me a folded GPS map with my wrong route circled in pencil. He'd drawn it while waiting for me to stop flailing. Emotional punch. I realized he never mocked me back. He just saved my team, saved my ego from self-destructing, and let the lesson land without humiliation. I underestimated quiet as weakness. It was competence with no need to advertise. Story 19. I used to live with a guy named Jalen. He was the most silent person I've ever met. Headphones, sketchbook, kind eyes. Our third roommate, Bryn, was the opposite. Constant chatter, constant opinions, and a weird hobby of teaching Jalen how to adult. Bryn would lecture him about dishes, utilities, how landlords work, and act like Jalen was lucky to be tolerated. Jalen never fought. He'd just nod and say, "Okay." When our lease ended, Bryn turned into a monster. He insisted he'd handle the walkthrough, told Jalen not to bother, and then texted later that the landlord was keeping the entire deposit because of damage Jalen caused. Jalen replied one word, "Oh." Bryn smirked to me. "See? He knows he messed up." A week later, Jalen invited both of us to the empty apartment for closure. Bryn came ready to gloat. We walked in, and the living room wall was covered in a huge charcoal mural, done on removable paper sheets taped edge to edge. It showed the apartment in perfect detail. Every scuff on the baseboards, every pre-existing crack in the tile, the water stain by the window that had been there before we moved in. It wasn't just art. It was a forensic recreation. Jalen stood quietly and pulled out his phone. "I took photos on move-in day," he said. "And every month after, I don't like conflict, so I made a timeline." He tapped play on a slideshow that matched the mural, date-stamped. The damage Bryn blamed on him was clearly visible the day we got keys. Bryn started stuttering about miscommunication. Jalen didn't look angry. He looked sad. "You told me not to come to the walkthrough," he said softly. So I sent my evidence to the tenant board instead. Twist? He'd already filed for deposit return plus penalty. The hearing was scheduled. He'd only invited Bryn because he wanted him to know what truth looks like before he sits in front of a mediator. At the hearing, Bryn tried the loud charm act. The mediator watched Jalen's photo timeline for 5 minutes and then asked Bryn, "Why did you certify the damages without the other tenants present?" Bryn had no answer. "We got the deposit back." Bryn had to pay extra for bad faith withholding. Emotional punch. Afterward, I told Jalen I was sorry I hadn't stood up for him sooner. He shrugged and said quietly, "It's okay. I didn't need someone to yell. I needed someone to see." Then he peeled the mural off the wall, rolled it up like a poster, and carried it out. Proof that sometimes the quiet one has been documenting the whole story in a language you didn't think to read. Story 20. My friend Tori's baby shower was meant to be sweet and low stress. Her husband's sister, Maribel, had other plans. Maribel was one of those people who weaponizes helping. She bulldozed the decor, rewrote the guest list, and kept dropping little comments about how Tori was lucky we're stepping in because she's so soft-spoken. Tori is soft-spoken. She's the kind of person who says sorry when you bump into her. Maribel mistook that for permission. Halfway through gifts, Maribel clinked a glass and said she wanted to share a truth bomb. She launched into a speech about motherhood, then pivoted hard. Some women think they can just marry into a family and be the main character. But we're watching, right? She laughed like it was cute. People shifted uncomfortably. Tori stared at her lap, cheeks pink. I was about to stand up when Tori's dad, Mr. Everett, quietly walked to the front. I'd always thought of him as background. Kind, quiet engineer vibes. Rarely spoke at parties. He took the mic and said very calmly, "Maribel, I don't think you realize you're being recorded." Maribel blinked. "What?" He held up his phone. "I started recording because you've been sending my daughter texts for months telling her she's unfit, calling her temporary, and threatening to take her baby to raise it right. I asked her to save them. I asked her to let me handle it." The room went cold. Maribel tried to laugh. "It's family banter." Mr. Everett didn't raise his voice. "You also emailed a local lawyer asking about grandparents' rights against your brother's wife. I forwarded that email to my attorney. She's here." A woman near the snack table stood and gave a small wave. Maribel's face buckled. She looked at her brother for backup. He looked like someone had just discovered a trapdoor under his feet. Mr. Everett turned to the crowd. Tori didn't want drama today. She wanted to celebrate, but she also deserves to be safe. So here's what happens next. Maribel, you will stop contacting her directly. Any communication goes through counsel. If you violate that, we file for a restraining order. And you will not be alone with this child. Ever. He handed the mic back like he'd just returned a borrowed pen. Emotional punch. Tori started crying. Not out of embarrassment, but out of this deep relief that made my own throat burn. She whispered, "I didn't know how to make her stop." Mr. Everett kissed her forehead and said softly, "That's why I'm here." Maribel left the shower without a word, heels clicking fast like she was running from a fire. The rest of us sat stunned, then slowly clapped. Not because it was a show, but because the quiet man in the room had just drawn a line loud enough to protect a whole new life.